I live on Stockyard Creek in the Hunter Valley. I've lived here for 45 years and we've tried to revegetate and bring the valley back to its natural environment as much as possible. The property had been heavily grazed with very little vegetation, particularly in the creek. It was really just one long length of sand. Our first action was to not have stock on the property, and we spent a number of years clearing weeds and planting native indigenous species. Our planting was stabilising the banks, but the creek bed still wasn't stable and it was starting to erode. So we wanted to investigate what to do about that, and Andrew Brooks was a researcher at Macquarie University in Sydney who was looking at changing completely the attitude of river managers.
We were doing research into the role that large woody debris plays in natural system functioning. I did work down in East Gippsland in Victoria where there was rivers that were still full of their natural woody debris load. 30% of the bed was made up of wood. This happened over thousands of years. We dated logs that we'd pulled out of the bed of the river that were 8,000 years old. It was kind of like the reinforcement that held the whole system together. At the time when we first came here, Brian had been working on it for 20 or so years to revegetate, but most of the vegetation was on the banks. Some wood had started falling into the channel, but Brian was concerned that it was going to cause erosion, so he'd been tending to sort of pull it out. So what we wanted to do at that point was encourage the wood to stay in the channel, but also to add a whole lot of additional wood.
Andrew and his team were here for a number of months, building 22 structures. And over time, downstream of the structures, quite large ponds were created, and upstream, quite a lot of sediment was retained. But then in 2019, a massive fire came through, the worst fire we've experienced. And unfortunately, the creek being dry, the wood in those structures just added fuel to the fire and most of them burnt out. Almost immediately after the fires, we had some massive floods, which continued for a couple of years, but the structures still seem to be maintaining the work that they've been doing over the years.
We got involved at this site after the Black Summer bushfires. We became particularly interested in the story of what's happened out here and the previous works that have gone on. The log installations are holding up quite well, even after bushfire had gone through and done some damage. We commissioned Soil Conservation Service to come and do a review of how the log structures have gone out here, how they've performed.
Soil Conservation Service was engaged by local land services to come and inspect the site at Stockyard Creek. I was lucky enough to be an honours student with Andrew Brooks and was very familiar with this river reach, having undertaken a geomorphic assessment 10 years after log jams were constructed. And in 2022, we got to undertake a study 20 years post-construction. What we found was that even though 60% of the logs structures had experienced fire damage, the river reach was still showing geomorphic diversity and stability. There was natural wood recruitment from the surrounding landscape, and we had these geomorphic features that had been formed in association with the logs, had recruited natural vegetation, and that was still stable even post-fire and flood.
By introducing the wood into the channel, it allowed bars to accumulate and to stabilise and to get that vegetation coming in as well. Without having any wood in it, the bed is constantly mobile. So every flow that comes through, it moves, and any vegetation that does get a foothold gets taken out. And so by creating these stable hard points, we both create opportunities for vegetation to stabilise, but we also create opportunities to create scour pools and get more complexity into the creek bed.
Local Land Services also works with the Hunter Valley Flood Mitigation Scheme, an interagency government response to flooding in the upper catchment of the Hunter. That's really seen as part and parcel of flood mitigation throughout the whole catchment, because if you can slow down the floodwaters in the upper catchment, it mitigates some of the flooding damage in the lower catchment.
We can actually reduce the flooding downstream by increasing the amount of roughness in the channels, and that's what we've got here. We've got a rough channel. It's not just the wood, it's the vegetation as well. It's slowed the flood waves down. So it's taken the energy out of the floods, it's delaying its arrival further downstream and reducing the amount of erosion it causes along the way.
So the story here out at Stockyard Creek is one that local land services really want to celebrate and highlight, because it's a great example where we've got a project that's gone for so long, so many decades, that we can see the lessons learnt from it and we can see the improvements that have happened.
In an Australian context, we don't have many examples of a study that looks at a treatment reach through time, where we can see change and associate that with structures and natural revegetation.
It was really important to have a demonstration site like this where we can go, okay, it's okay to have wood in streams. It doesn't cause problems. It actually helps to improve the condition of the channel.
This investigation has been a really important lesson to see how a vegetated river reach can bounce back and be more resilient.
Being able to compare what the creek looks like now, I'm very pleased with how it has achieved what we originally tried to do.